It's kind of funny how when I first wanted to get into Mesoamerican mythology, it was almost like a coin toss between starting with the Aztec or the Mayan. So because of that, I know very little about the Maya. Besides what I researched for the Popol Vuh videos, of course. So because I'm lazy, I'm gonna do a video on the Aztecs today. Because, well, again. Now that I think about it, I'm honestly surprised I've only ever done like one or two other Aztec videos on this channel before. Huh. But that changes today. Now whenever someone talks about the Aztecs, they're of course talking about the empire that ruled over central Mexico before the arrival of the Europeans. Spanish. And a lot of the time, people focus on the fall of the empire because, well, the Spanish. When they arrived, they documented a lot of stuff they saw during and after the conquest of the region, in what we now call codices. It's thanks to these codices that we're able to get a glimpse into Aztec culture and their history. Now, the history of the Aztec Empire is very interesting, as the empire itself was actually ruled by an alliance of tribes known as the Triple Alliance, with the most powerful tribe being the Mexica. And yes, that's where Mexico got its name from, and we'll get into that a little bit later. However, there are tons of other tribes in the region as well, most of which spoke the same language, Nahuatl. The origins of the Aztecs are written down in several codices, such as the Boturini Codex and the Aben Codex, both of which describe just exactly where the Mexica originated from. Now here's the thing about the codices. While they are best records of anything Aztec, because they are handled by the Spanish, they are filled with all sorts of biases, making it hard to differentiate between fact and exaggeration that made the Aztecs look more barbaric and primitive than they were. Not only that, but the Aztecs who recounted the history of their people to the Spaniards included a decent amount of mythological shenanigans that we'll get into in a minute, as well as it being a story that most likely was passed down orally over a good few hundred years, not to mention what might have been lost or added in translation. It's kinda like a multi-century long game of telephone, so just keep that in mind as I recount the history of the Aztec Empire. According to the Spanish, according to the Aztecs, centuries after the story begins. Miles upon miles north of what would become the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, and later Mexico City, is a place deep underground known only as Chicomostoc, the place of the 7 caves. Each cave was home to one of several tribes, all of which spoke Nahuatl. Similar to the human creation myth found in Inca mythology, the tribes were born here, and one by one emerged out of the caves. Why did these humans come out of the caves? Well, this is just speculation on my part, but it could be symbolism for either the Maltesupacli, the beast whose corpse makes up the world, or the Earth Mother Quatlique. But again, that's just speculation. Then again, according to one myth, the feather serpent god Quetzalcoatl made the humans, but whatever, mythology is weird like that. The tribes then settled on an island in the middle of a lake, known as none other than the mythical home of the Aztecs, Aztlan, the place of the white heron. Aztlan actually being why the Spanish referred to the Mexican Empire as Aztec, or Azteca, those who originate from Aztlan. But I'm getting ahead of myself. According to some versions of the myth, Chicomostoc was actually inside a hill in Aztlan, each of the tribes actually being the same ones found in the Valley of Mexico later on, due to a large migration. The specific tribes from Aztlan change depending on who tells the story, but are generally the Xochimilca, Chalca, Tepaneca, Cohua, Tlahuica, and the Tlaxcala, each tribe leaving Aztlan one at a time until all that was left were the Mexica, a tribe that worshipped the war god Huitzilopochtli, son of the Earth Mother Quatlique. Eventually, Huitzilopochtli told the Mexica that they too had to migrate south to find a new home, so they packed up their stuff and left. Now when I say the migration was long, I mean it was long, as in it wasn't just a straight line from point A to point B. After a long period of searching for a new home, they would settle down, sometimes for as long as several generations, before eventually picking up their stuff again and continuing their journey. The reasons for them leaving all their settlements could vary from natural disasters, lack of resources, or just general conflict with other tribes in the area. Sheesh, talk about long rest stops. I mean, I could totally see Huitzilopochtli saying, "You guys better stop fighting right now or I'll turn this dang car around. And no more potty breaks. No, we have enough Pringles and beef jerky as it is. We don't need more." Anyways, where was I? Oh yeah. They also carried around statues and other symbols of Huitzilopochtli for the priest to communicate with the god. Statues which now have been destroyed. The Spanish. Gosh, it's gonna hurt my throat. These statues being another reason why they would leave their settlements. Their god just said so, or the priest did, depending on how you look at it. I mean, maybe Huitzilopochtli's just shy? They passed a sacred hill known as Coatepec, or Serpent Hill, which is said to be the birthplace of Huitzilopochtli himself, which is an entire story for another day. Finally, after generations upon generations of searching and migrating, they finally come across the Valley of Mexico, which of course wasn't called that back then, but you know what I mean. Now while the Mexica had just gotten there, all of the other tribes from Aztlan and Chicomostoc had been living here for a while, not to mention the ancient city of Teotihuacan, of which we're not even sure who actually originally built it, plus Tolan and other cities and ruins that even the Aztecs themselves thought of as ancient. Now, the tribes who were there weren't too happy about the strangers suddenly appearing in their home. I mean, can you blame them? It's been so long since the good old days of Aztlan, with all the herons and magical talking statues of war gods that suspiciously only talk to priests. So it comes at no surprise that they're pretty hostile towards them, forcing them to live on Chapultepec Hill, or Grasshopper Hill. Fun fact, that place is actually now a park with museums, one of which is a freaking castle, and the other is the former residence of the presidents of Mexico. Fun! Eventually, the Mexica became pretty friendly with the Cobocan tribe, who were probably the descendants of the ancient Toltecs, which again is an entire subject for another video. Now, the Aztecs were obsessed with the Toltecs, and thought of them as the peak of civilization, so of course the Mexica did their best to impress the Cobocan with their military and survival skills. One of these acts included a battle where an enemy of the Mexica had their heart cut out and thrown into the nearby lake Texcoco. The spot where it landed is going to be very important pretty soon. The Cobocan were impressed with the Mexica, and appointed them the very own plot of land to call home. Even though it was pretty hard to live on, they still managed. Now, this is where things get kinda gross. You see, just about everyone and their grandmother wanted to marry a Cobocan princess, possibly to be part of the line of Toltecs, or for power, resources, and human protection. You know, the only reasons to get married. The Mexica were by far no exception. They asked the Cobocans to marry the princess, and the chieftain allowed it, seeing his daughter off to go to the Mexica settlement. Later on, the chieftain walks over to see his daughter, but instead he only sees that there was a priest standing there, and he just so happened to be wearing something that looked all too familiar to the chieftain. It, as a matter of fact, was the flayed skin of the princess that he was wearing. Yeah, the Mexica were pretty well known for their human sacrifices, especially for their war god. What, never said these guys were innocent? Obviously enraged as anyone would be, the chieftain ordered a full-on attack on the Mexica, driving them out of yet again another settlement, with a volley of spears and arrows flying at them. The Mexica retreated to Lake Texcoco and quickly built rafts made out of reeds to escape the assault. According to the story, there was a flash of white light that seemed to turn the night sky into day, with one of the priests pointing to something in the waters. He pointed at one of the small marshy islands where there was an eagle standing atop a cactus and devouring a snake, the very location where the heart from earlier was thrown. Interestingly enough, the prickly pear or tuna fruit that grows on cacti looks suspiciously similar to a heart. This was a sign straight from Huitzilopochtli himself, and they knew that they had found it. After over a century of searching, the Mexica had finally found their home. After a lot of hard work and engineering, the Mexica were eventually able to build their new city over this marshy lake. This city being Tenochtitlan. When I say this city was huge, I mean it was huge, as in a population of over 200,000 to 300,000 people, if not more by the time the Spanish arrived, who themselves marveled at the size and architecture of the city. I mean, this city was one of the largest in the world at the time, being up there with cities in Europe. The conquistadors themselves writing that it was like the Venice of the New World, probably due to all the canals and the fact that it too was a floating city. At the time, it had already been around 300 years since the migration. Interesting fact, after the conquest, the Spanish renamed Tenochtitlan Mexico City, after the full name that the Aztecs gave to it, Mexico Tenochtitlan, of course referring to the Mexica. According to the codices that were written during and after the conquest, Moctezuma, no, not that one, I mean Mr. M I, sent a group of shapeshifting priests to find Aztlan. Since it's been so long since the migration, the Aztecs themselves were starting to get fascinated on the idea of their previous homeland. They shapeshift into animals as soon as they find Coatepec, and return to human form as they arrived in Aztlan, where they are greeted by a priest and the mother of Huitzilopochtli herself, the Earth Mother Goddess Qualique. She states that the people of Aztlan used to be immortal, due to refusing luxury items like cacao and gold, and refused the offerings that the priests brought. But she did give them maguey and other plants from Aztlan to take home with them. They turned back into animals and went back to Tenochtitlan. Again, this story is both a mix of historical events and a bunch of mythological tales, making it hard to know what actually happened. I mean, did Aztlan even exist, and was the migration real? Was there really an eagle sitting atop where the heart was thrown? Or was it all just a story that the Aztecs told to make them look like divine rulers of Lake Texcoco and the whole empire? Well, I'd say both, actually. There is evidence of real migrations north of Tenochtitlan/Mexico City, from pottery to language. I mean, just look at this map of the Proto-Uto-Aztecan languages, a family of languages that are part of the same family tree. Kinda like how French, Spanish, English, and Italian, among others, are called Latin languages, meaning that they all evolved from actual Latin. We can see that in Nahuatl, which is now found in Mexico, is actually related to languages found in modern day United States, like Hopi. I got a video on that if you want to check that out. This right here is why I love mythology so much. It's a confusing mess of myths and historical events mushed together with a huge cultural impact even to this day. I mean, just look at the Mexican flag with the eagle eating a snake on it, just like in the Aztec Origin Myth. And the idea of Aztlan itself is so important to modern day Chicanos, or just Latin Americans in the US in general, as it shows that we belong here just as much as anyone else. Much like the language, this is the ancestral home of all sorts of Mexican tribes. I mean, heck, you don't even have to go that far, considering the fact that states like California, Texas, and others were literally part of Mexico until the early to mid 1800s. Anyways, I kind of went on a tangent there. So, what's the lesson of the day here, kids? The prickly pear is a fruit that actually tastes kind of good, so yeah. Just think about it.